She's not a hostage, and she's not on house arrest. The war is over, so just like everybody else, she's free to move as she pleases. As far as I'm concerned, as long as she doesn't take my kids, I don't care where she goes. This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, Operation Anteater, Part 15. When we left off, Sincere was getting it from every side. To be clear, the only thing that the round table had heard about the situation with Natalia was his confession, the one that she'd recorded with her cell phone. We'd gone back down memory lane and were finding out how he got to that confession, what it was that he needed to confess, and how exactly Natalia had got that confession on a recording. So when part 14 ended, we'd found out that 5 months earlier, Sincere had spiked Natalia's drink. She'd used the polish that her sister Courtney gave her to discover that it was spiked, threw it in his face, and whooped his behind, based on Courtney's analysis of the surreptitiously obtained video footage of Sincere's reaction to the lieutenant assigned to Natalia's team, flirting with her during that shopping trip. Courtney had deduced that Sincere was primed and ready to go, so she'd planned a dinner for her and her mother the following day, and told the soldiers who were assigned to his team to follow his lead. She also told the soldiers assigned to Natalia to lay low and only intervene if they knew for sure that Natalia was in danger, or if they heard from her or Ezra, because they'd both be watching. The soldiers had seen when Sincere had spiked that drink, but Courtney quickly let them know that Natalia had polish on her fingers that would detect a substance in that drink, and she'd been instructed to use it if Sincere offered her anything to drink. So they waited to make sure that Natalia was going to use that fingernail polish. And when she did, they sat back and watched. They were not expecting for Natalia to throw that drink in Sincere's face and beat him like he stole something. But she did. They managed to get him out of the townhouse and back into the car and instructed his driver to take him home. So when the driver returned Sincere to the safe house, he was still working through what he was going to say to Courtney. His story was greatly dependent on what Natalia was going to say to Courtney when Courtney took Miss Eugenia back to the townhouse. Unfortunately for Sincere, he was out of town. When he got back to his room, Courtney was waiting for him inside. She had the bedside lamp on, and she was watching a TikTok video and laughing. She looked up when he came in and said, "Babe, let me tell you what happened at dinner." Then she immediately started talking. She barely looked at him, so it was clear that she hadn't seen the injuries to his face. She hopped up off the bed, headed to the in-room bar, and started making them both drinks. Sincere didn't know what the hell was going on, but he knew enough about Courtney and how well she did her job to know not to take his eyes off of her while she made that drink. He had a clear view of her pouring his Hennessy, so he relaxed a little and prepared himself for the eventuality that she would see his face. Natalia had done a number on him. He'd used the wet rag and dry towel that the soldier had given him, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. He was absolutely going to need medical attention, because he was pretty sure that his nose was broken. When Courtney handed him the drink, she just kept right on talking. Walked back over to the bed, sat down, sipped her drink, so Sincere downed his, headed over to the bar and poured himself another. He was going to need liquid courage to sell the lie that he was going to tell Courtney. After his third drink, Courtney finally looked up at him and said, "What the hell happened to your face?" She stood up, walked over to the wall, hit the light switch, and said, "Damn." Then she rushed over to him and said, "What did I miss? And what do the other nigga look like?" And then Sincere just started talking. He couldn't stop. He told her everything. His mind was racing. His mouth was going, but the words that were coming out of it were not the story that he'd already scripted. He was telling her the unadulterated truth, and at one point he started trying to cover his own mouth to stop the words from coming out. Courtney had seen when her sister had beat the brakes off of Sincere. She told the soldiers to follow the script, and then she told her mother that they needed to go. She had their food bagged up to go, and had a separate driver drop her mother back off at the townhouse, while she sped across town to get back to the safe house so that she could beat Sincere there. If Sincere wanted to drug people, she was going to show him how it was done. She poured a liquid in one of the glasses and hid it in the back of the stack of glasses, sat another glass on top of it, and waited for Sincere's return. When he returned, she made it a point not to really look at his face. She already knew what she would see. She grabbed the upside-down glass in the back, scooped up some ice, and poured it in the glass in the back. Then she put a scoop of ice in her glass and poured them both double shots of Hennessy on the rocks, handed him that glass in the back, and pretended to be unconcerned with whether he drank it or not, as she continued telling him about her dinner with her mother. Apparently, she and Miss Eugenia got into a little disagreement, and the dinner had to be cut short. And that was why she was back at the safe house when he'd returned. His second and third double shots of Hennessy just added to the effects of the liquid that had been poured in that glass. It was a revised truth serum developed by Rennie in concert with the Tanaka chemist. This version of the truth serum didn't require that the right questions be asked. It would cause the person who'd been dosed with it to have extremely loose lips. They'd tell you any and everything that you wanted to know. And it had the unfortunate side effect of extreme memory loss and deep, deep sleep once the individual who consumed it was done talking. Courtney had started the recording device on her lapel pin when Sincere had poured his second drink. And her plan was to leave. Once Sincere was done with his confession, she was going to head back to Natalia's townhouse and get her and her mother out of town. But as Sincere talked, Courtney got angrier and angrier because he didn't just confess what he'd done that day. He confessed his entire plan, his motivations, and all of it was much, much worse than even Catherine had imagined. And for a split second, Courtney lost the plot. She forgot who Sincere was, how high the stakes were, what she'd agreed to do and not do. And before she could even stop herself, she'd rushed over to Sincere, pulled a switchblade, and hit him twice in the abdomen. And as he collapsed to the floor, she realized what she had done. And since there was nothing she could do to change it, and she wasn't all that sorry, she decided to continue as planned. She needed to get over to that townhouse and get her mother and sister the hell out of Maryland. She was sure that one of the soldiers would check on Sincere and get him the medical attention that he needed. And if he lived, she'd be sure that he got what was coming to him. At the round table, phones was vibrating all over the place, incessantly. At the same time, Natalia and Catherine were answering some difficult questions. The heads wanted to know how Catherine had managed to get Natalia in that situation in the first place. How on earth was Sincere even able to be alone with Natalia? How did two separate teams of soldiers drop the ball? Why was Sincere taken to Natalia's townhouse? Why was he allowed to leave the townhouse? And Catherine was doing her absolute best to spin it, to ensure that Courtney's cover wasn't blown. Neither she nor Natalia had shared any details that would indicate that Courtney was a covert. Where she gotten the polish that she used to test the drink, or that security was in on the plan, or that there even was a plan. Catherine was trying desperately to get them to focus on the fact that they just heard Sincere confess to everything out of his own mouth on tape and shift away from blaming her for putting Natalia and her sister in that predicament in the first place. With all of the phones vibrating, Q needed to take control of the meeting. He said, "We need to take a brief recess. Natalia, please return to the waiting room. I need to speak with LJ and the heads alone. Catherine, Sincere, phones." Then he held out both hands and Catherine and Sincere turned over their work phones. He continued holding his hands out because he knew that they each had at least one personal phone. Catherine handed over hers and Sincere said, "I got a baby on the way. Janelle could blow any day." And Q just stared until Sincere handed him the phone. He slid it over to Angela and said, "Not a word from you two. And that's not a suggestion." In a side room, LJ said, "I already sent Mom Joyce. She's gonna keep me posted." Manny said, "That's not good enough. Call her." LJ did as he was asked, and then he said, "She blocked me." Idris said, "Q, get Angela in here." When Q returned with Angela, before they could even ask her anything, she said, "We had words last night and this morning before I left my estate. Mom Joyce was trying to talk some sense into her. I just tried to call her, and I'm blocked." Then Q and the Queen Mother tried calling Regina, and they were blocked too. All of the vibrating phones around the room were the heads and their right hands being notified that something was afoot at Angela and Stephanie's estate. Regina had used the boxes that she'd saved when LJ had had all her things packed up at the family complex in Denton, loaded in a U-Haul and transported to the estate to pack up all of her things. She'd had a U-Haul trailer transported to the estate and had the soldiers attaching it to her SUV. Several other soldiers helped her carry out those boxes and place them in the U-Haul. Alejandro said, "I say we let her get the whole U-Haul packed up, and then when she attempts to leave, have the soldiers hold her there." And in unison, the Queen Mother and Angela both said, "Absolutely not." And LJ said, "She's not a hostage, and she's not on house arrest. The war is over, so just like everybody else, she's free to move as she pleases." The Queen Mother said, "Exactly. What's important is finding out where she's going so we can keep her safe." LJ said, "And as far as I'm concerned, as long as she doesn't take my kids, I don't care where she goes." Manny said, "Well, we don't need a repeat of that whole Veronica situation. Regina's been a part of this family for a long time. She knows enough to be dangerous. And if she's not mentally or emotionally stable, she could very well connect with the wrong people or be manipulated by the wrong people. We could be right back in the middle of another war. Angela said, Regina is not like that. She's hurt, angry, embarrassed, maybe even a little bitter. But she has never been vindictive, and she never put her own children or anyone else's in danger. And for the record, she doesn't know nearly as much as you think. Q said, nah, she wouldn't pull a Veronica. She'd probably pull a Portia, though. And Angela elbowed him and said, don't do that. Then she continued saying, Regina has always made it a point to stay out of Five Family business, even with LJ being in the mix. If anything, she knows everything there is to know about my personal business and Vibrantly You. Then LJ said, and about Montclair Enterprises, since she's been working with Natalia. But both of those businesses are legitimate. So either way, that's not a concern. Manny asked, so she doesn't know anything about what you've been doing with Angela for the Five Families? And LJ said, nah, she's an attorney and she was with me when I was on the force. We're both well-versed in not bringing our work home. We never asked one another any questions, and we ain't pillow talk. We didn't even discuss the cases that Q and I's PI firm handled. Then Q asked, what do you want to do, bro? LJ said, this is personal, not business. She wants to hurt me, not the families. Just let me handle it. If I have any concerns that whatever she's up to is actually going to impact anybody other than me, I'll clue you in. Idris said, fine, but are you going to insist that she take security? LJ said, with Angela's permission, I'll offer. Angela said, of course, do what you need to do to keep your family safe. LJ said, I'll ask where she's going. I'll offer her security. Through Mom Joyce, of course. But I ain't begging. She's grown and single, so she's free to be as stupid as she wants to be. My only concern is my children. When the discussion was complete, all of the heads exited the room. Angela and LJ stayed behind, though. And Angela said, so you really gonna let her leave without knowing where she's going? LJ said, like I said, she's grown and free to be as stupid as she chooses. Angela just shook her head, and LJ said, to be honest, I pray that she leaves town and goes far, far away. Sits her behind down somewhere and gets some damn help. I hope I don't even hear from her until she's ready to focus on our kids. That would make it a whole lot easier for me to manage what they going through. I need to be focused on getting them on a real routine with therapy and extracurricular activities before school starts back. All this back and forth, one night here, 2 nights there, is hella chaotic. Divorce or not, this ain't what I signed up for. I'd rather be a full-time single father than to continue co-parenting in what can only be described as a volatile environment. Angela said, and I'm sure that would make it a whole lot easier for you to date too, huh? LJ said, that ain't even where my head is. Angela said, no judgment. I'm just saying, last night you were pretty upset about her interrupting your little date. LJ said, that wasn't even a real date. Courtney is spoken for. Angela said, are you serious right now? I know damn well you don't actually believe that her and Sincere. LJ said, nah. She's all caught up with someone I can't name. It's a secret. I think Sincere was just a job. I don't know if Natalia knows, so don't say nothing. But I think she's the covert that's been reporting remotely. Angela said, oh, now that makes sense. Because I was almost about to question the sense of Big Nate's daughters. The two chuckled, and then Angela said, but so you know, if you find something you like, whether it be temporary or otherwise, you have my full support. I want you to find happiness. LJ said, oh, really now? Angela said, yes. And that's precisely what I told Regina last night, which is what I think is the cause of her little shenanigans today. She was concerned that your attention was going towards younger women. She wanted me to share her concern. My only concern is that you are healed enough for whatever you get involved in, and that whomever you choose has good intentions. I'd hate for you to put yourself in another situation where you gotta build a woman like you're going to build a bear. LJ chuckled and said, appreciate it. You're a real one. Angel said, you're welcome. And I'm sure that you don't want to expend energy keeping up with Regina's whereabouts. But I don't know how well I'd sleep at night if I didn't know where she was or how she was doing. Do you mind if I put Lorenzo on the U-Haul return, her credit cards, and her passport? LJ said, I don't care what you do. Regina's lucky to have you as a friend. And so am I. The two hugged, and when they returned to the meeting room, they both thought that Catherine was either reading their minds or she'd eavesdropped on their conversation. As she said, clearly Courtney was not left heartbroken. Ain't that right, LJ? Courtney and LJ went on a date after Sunday service. A date that Courtney initiated. How'd the date go, LJ? And LJ could tell from the look on Catherine's face that she was just trying to get under Sincere's skin and get him out of character. Since he knew that Ezra knew that the date was a sham, he was willing to play the game. But since Courtney's father was also in the room, he decided it was best to play it neutral. So he said, "Oh, it was great. It was a good way to get back out there. Courtney is a brilliant, beautiful woman." Then Catherine said something he definitely didn't expect because it wasn't true. She said, "Yeah, Courtney did tell me that the date was a breath of fresh air after all she's been through. And she can't wait for the next date. She said something about you all changing time zones." LJ smirked and didn't even respond. Out of his peripheral vision, though, he saw that Ezra didn't even flinch. Big Nate was giving him the side eye, and Sincere looked like he was about to blow his top. He was mad as hell. He said, "So last night, you let me tell you all about my relationship with Courtney. How upset I was that she was playing me to the left. And you ain't think to mention that you was seeing her? That you'd come from a date with her and was planning another one? You trying to take my girl on a trip? Nigga, I thought it was bros before hoes. If I remember correctly, it was you, Q, who brought up the fact that he just come from a damn date. I thought you was my cousin. You was trying to show me love and teach me the right way. But you was playing me?" Before Q could respond, LJ said, "What's the matter, Sincere? I ain't know you was choosing for real. I thought you was just salty because old girl had cut you back. Thought you was just ego tripping because you don't like the word no. Figured you was running game to get back at her little sister." Then he shrugged and looked away like it didn't matter. And Sincere lost it. Once again, he had to be restrained, and all three of the men, Q, Big Wood, and LJ, realized that he actually meant the mess that he'd said the night before. He was in love with Courtney, thought she was the one, and he'd been looking for her because he wanted to get her back. The crazy thing is that was a part of his confession on the recording that Natalia had provided. 5 months earlier, when Courtney left him slumped at that safe house, she'd had the driver hightail it to Natalia's townhouse. She got there in record time, and when she did, Natalia was gone. She was kicking herself for not calling Natalia as soon as Sincere left. She should have told her to start packing. She didn't consider that with Natalia being a civilian, she'd attempt to take matters into her own hands. Since Natalia had no clue what Courtney was planning, she had a one-track mind. Her only concern was getting Sincere to agree to go away. He was going to tell him that the inside of the townhouse was under surveillance, that he was on camera trying to drug her, and that if he didn't give up this sick obsession with her and her relationship with Saint, she was going to turn the evidence over, and his head was going to be on the chopping block. But if he agreed to just cut his losses, she'd actually help him try to repair his relationship with his brother. She thought the plan was foolproof. The soldiers had tried to talk her out of going to the safe house, but they weren't allowed to tell her about the instructions they'd received from Courtney. They had no clue what Courtney had planned. So with no other options, they had to follow her orders. They took her to the safe house. When one of the soldiers at the safe house led her to Sincere's room, they both discovered Sincere slumped on the floor and bleeding profusely. Natalia ran over to render aid, and the soldier quickly called the lieutenant, who called Ezra. And Ezra called a St. James doctor. The doctor arrived in record time, and Sincere was barely clinging to life. So he had to be transported to a secure, secret St. James clinic, where he received blood, his 2 wounds were tended to, and he was monitored. Thank God he was a strong, healthy young man, because anybody else would have definitely been dead. They weren't sure how long he'd been laying on that floor bleeding, but Natalia had arrived within 5 minutes of Courtney leaving. So it was probably a good thing that Natalia had insisted on going to that safe house to have a word with Sincere, and Courtney hadn't told her sister the plan. Because according to the doctor, Sincere would not have made it if he'd been found even an hour later. All the soldiers could say was what time he'd gone into that room and who'd gone in it before he did. When Natalia asked, they didn't say though. So Natalia called Courtney, and as soon as Courtney answered, she said, "Get back to the townhouse now." When Natalia got back to the townhouse, the jig was up. Both sisters had to confess all to their mother, and Miss Eugenia was hot as fish grease. She was appalled that her daughters had lied to her. Courtney ended up confessing that she was in fact a covert, that she'd been pretending to be interested in Sincere, that the real reason she'd cut their dinner short was because she'd seen Natalia beating the dog snot out of Sincere's behind, and that she was the one who'd stabbed him. And before Miss Eugenia could really give her daughters hell, Courtney's phone rang. It was Catherine. Catherine said, "So imagine my surprise when I got a call from the lieutenant at the safe house telling me that Sincere had been stabbed and you were the last one with him. You casually walked out of that room like nothing had occurred, and your sister is the one who found him. I got an update from the doctor, And he said that that man is fighting for his life. I thought I told you. And before Catherine could finish, Miss Eugenia snatched the phone. She said, let me tell you something. You conniving, good for nothing, gutter, viper snake. You put both of my daughters in danger. I told your stepson what I would do to him if he even attempted to touch a hair on either of my daughters' heads. Clearly, I should have been telling you. I wouldn't expect an infertile like you to understand. But my daughters got it honest. You think Courtney put holes in Sincere? Baby, I will cut you from womb to sternum and leave you with a hole that can never be repaired. Behind my babies. I try my best to live like Jesus, but I got some Peter in me. So if you want to avoid that fate, you'll play the rest of this my way. And then she told Catherine her plan. A plan that she'd come up with while listening to both of her daughters tell their stories. A plan she hadn't even shared with them. Miss Eugenia wasn't none to play with either. She stayed out of Five Family business, but she was married to a certified OG. And her Afro-Latina daughters had both Puerto Rican and Jamaican blood running through their veins. The Jamaican blood was courtesy of Miss Eugenia. And she married a gangster because her daddy was a gangster. She wasn't new to this either. She was true to it. And when she finished telling Catherine her plan, Catherine said, your daughters better pray that Sincere lives and that if he does, he doesn't remember a damn thing.
Said you can't talk like that and be safe. Baby, God knows the heart that he made. I pray hard, but I don't play fair. Go play with your mama, don't play over here. South side of the king.